In our next section, we have presentations from 4 startups who will now each be providing insights into how their technologies are tackling climate change. We have PolyJoule and Stable, who are from MIT, and SMAP Energy and Bumblebee Power from Imperial College. Our first startup is PolyJoule. PolyJoule are an MIT spin-off. Eli Pastor, the CEO, will describe how PolyJoule has developed a suite of proprietary chemical and manufacturing technologies to disrupt the utility and energy markets, building high power, low cost, non-lithium batteries for the grid. Over to you, Eli. You're live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning over on the East Coast. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Eli Pastor. I'm the CEO of PolyJoule, and as mentioned, we're building high power, low cost energy storage for the grid. So it's an exciting time. 5 years ago, batteries would not be a commonplace word when you thought about the electricity sector. And today we're hearing about hundreds of megawatt hours to gigawatt hours going up everywhere from California to Europe to Southeast Asia. We see this as a great opportunity, and one of the things that we notice right now is that the majority of the technology being deployed is lithium ion based, and that's because there's not a better solution. PolyJoule is trying to find a better solution to grid level energy storage. Now, the reason we think that lithium ion is not a good solution is it's still too expensive. It's got to be a third or at least a half of the cost of what it is today. It's not environmentally robust. There's no recycling infrastructure in place. It doesn't last in very hot and very cold temperatures, and the manufacturing is sort of limited to certain sectors around the world. PolyJoule takes a different approach from a chemical standpoint, but also from an engineering standpoint. So our batteries are polymer based, which means you can build them in Asia, you can build them in the United States, you can build them in Europe. That also allows you to reduce the cost dramatically. The batteries themselves are thermally robust, so you put them in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest or on the top of the Himalayas, you can charge and discharge them, and you can't actually do that with lithium-ion batteries. But I think most importantly, because we're thinking about batteries as you think of capital assets in the utility space, these things have to last for 20 or 30 years, and they have to last through rain, wind, and snow. And on top of that, they've got to be environmentally benign. You know, if something goes wrong, whether it's a natural disaster or human intervention, it can't be damaging to the individuals, and it also can't be damaging to the environment. And that's really where PolyJoule shines. You know, we've got a recyclable battery that's pH neutral, and, you know, if it does end up in a landfill, it's not going to cause any problems. Fitting with the theme of this webinar, I'd like to talk a little bit about PolyJoule's innovation journey, because it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. We started way back in 2014 with the periodic table of elements, and we said, okay, throw out the lead, throw out the cobalt, throw out the lithium, try to find a better way to build batteries. And through a couple of brilliant PhD scientists, many of them coming from MIT, we went through about 10,000 different molecular formulations in order to arrive at our current chemistry. Now, the other side of that is actually engineering. You can have the next best thing in chemistry, and if you can't scale it, it's never going to reach the marketplace. So way back in 2015, PolyJoule was building small cells that would power watch batteries. And as you can see, this is sort of like caveman to human progression. In 2019, we started to hit our grid submodules, and 2020 really is our technology launch date. I'd like to talk a little bit about PolyJoule's current pilot. It's actually going to go live in the next couple of months. What we have is a distributed energy storage customer that wants a couple of things. Number one, they want an environmentally robust type of battery that can go in farms and manufacturing sites. Number two, they need something that has high power. So if you look at these graphs over on the right, the upper right graph shows the solar solar power panels of their facility, peaks at about 50 kilowatts. And the bottom right shows the actual power draw of the facility, which also peaks around 50 kilowatts. The problem is those two lines are not temporally aligned. And so if you throw a high power battery in there, you've just enabled your solar power to capture any excess. And during the morning and evening periods when you don't have sun, you can still power up your equipment. We are always looking for people who want to try the next best thing or the cutting edge. So if you do have distributed energy storage needs, whether that's in data centers or telecom or distributed EV charging, or even in industrial sectors like wastewater treatment and planning and damming, PolyJoule really is probably your next best thing in terms of safety, robustness, lifetime, and cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eli. Next up, we have Paul Monroe, UK Director of SMAP Energy.
And now Paul Monroe from SMAP Energy.
Hello, I'm Paul Monroe. I'm one of the co-founders of SMAP Energy. SMAP stands for Smart Meter Analytics Platform. And what we're doing is we are helping energy utilities make the most of their collected smart meter data and turn it into business value. So the major trend that we're seeing across the world and that's driving the digitalization of the energy sector is the growth of smart meters. There's going to be over 1 billion installed by 2022, which is over 80% of households across most of the Western world. However, the challenge for the utilities is that many of them are struggling to fully integrate and utilize the data. And there's numerous reasons for this. It's some of the very basic things is these are very large organizations, to more regional differences in the energy markets, to even just difficulties in recruiting specialist data science talent. But what we found is going to be the solution is having a flexible platform that's able to cater and build different applications that utilize the smart meter data. And so that's what we've done with the Smart Meter Analytics Platform, B2B SaaS solution that we've developed. We work with energy utilities who are collecting smart meter data, and we transform that into a variety of different applications. It could be the very arcane back office processes that you as an energy consumer would never see, to some of the more front-facing applications as well, for engaging customers or promoting behavioral shift, as we'll see coming up. But these wide variety of applications, you can think of our solution a bit like an app store for the energy sector here. So a little bit about the company is that we are about 25 people now. We have actually offices across London, Tokyo, and Beirut, and we were actually a spin out of the University of Cambridge. We have numerous energy utilities that are subscribers on our platform, as well as a robust pipeline of different projects and trials. And other professional affiliations. For example, we've gone through both the EDF and EON accelerators, and of course the climatetech program as well. So one of the big questions that we typically get asked is these smart meter data applications. What can we actually do with them? Can we see an example? And so I'd like to spend a few minutes just going through an example of one of the most promising applications that we have, and this is what we call our demand response application. Now, our particular expertise in this field is using smart meter data for forecasting and predicting behavioral shifts. So this is something actually that we've been developing in partnership with the University of Cambridge through various research incentives and programs that we've worked with. And the need that we're addressing here is that energy utilities, when they're responding to short-term changes in energy demand, and short-term being on the matter of hours to days here, typically that has been involved in generating more or less energy. But really, we believe there's an opportunity to pass some of this value on to the customers who have the capacity and their habits to shift their own energy consumption and receive savings. So this is what we're doing with our demand response application. So what we do is we're tracking various metrics on the direction of the utility clients. So things like the wholesale power price or regional temperatures. And we're using different signals to, along with the signals from the utility's own portfolio, to calculate and optimize incentives to give to their customers. And this is something that we've actually been doing in numerous trials in different short-term sort of circumstances. So for example, it could be offering incentives in response to summer heat waves or winter cold fronts that come in, or even more recently, the lockdown that's been happening from the COVID pandemic. Basically, these short-term changes present an opportunity for us to pass the savings on to the energy consumers. And we've actually been running numerous trials now, particularly with our customers in Japan, where we've done it with over 40,000 customers. And we provide the various digital pieces of this application to promote these sorts of programs and also provide the back-end elements of predicting and optimizing these different incentives as well. Ultimately, this application allows our utility clients to not only enhance their profitability, but also share the rewards with the customers directly, which gives an opportunity to build a better brand and possibly recruit new customers in the process. And the reason we're able to do this very effectively is because we rely strictly on the smart meter data. We don't have any additional hardware requirements, nor do we have any adverse data collection requirements, which ultimately makes our solution more flexible and more cost-effective to deploy as a result. So this is just kind of scratching the surface of what we're able to fully do, but I'm happy to point you to our research section on our webpage or to schedule a time to discuss in person if you'd like to learn more. Thank you very much.
You're live.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We are Stable Auto. We're building the foundation of an electric fleet future. My name is Rohan Puri. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stable. Stable is a company, my co-founder and I originally met at MIT Media Lab. We used to work in a group called Camera Culture, which focused on computer vision and energy transmission technology. We're based out of San Francisco, so very early morning over here, and it's a pleasure to share a little bit about what we do. We focus on commercial electric fleets that are doing anything from delivery to rideshare and taxi services. And the reason for that is that electrifying one taxi saves as much carbon dioxide as electrifying 3 regular consumer vehicles. They just drive a lot more, they demand a lot more energy. And so it makes sense to focus on this segment when it comes to electrification and greenhouse gas emission reduction. What's fascinating actually is just the rideshare fleets alone are a very small fraction of what's out there today. In fact, less than 0.5% of California's electric vehicles are in rideshare fleets, but they're already pulling 23% of the power on public fast chargers today. This tiny fraction of vehicles is absolutely dominating what public EV chargers are actually seeing. The problem with this is that commercial fleets need more chargers, but the charging providers need fleets. And so we have this mismatch of supply and demand. And the public stations as they're located today are actually quite poorly located. They're predominantly near residential, work, and retail, which doesn't necessarily meet the needs of these giant urban fleets that are pulling 23% of the power already today. And public stations offer no guarantee of availability for those fleets. So it's difficult for those fleets to scale if they don't have an assurance that when they arrive, they'll be able to charge, and they're not going to be waiting behind, the public or another fleet. I love showing this picture because I think it really puts everything in perspective. This is a giant charging facility in Shenzhen, China. If you didn't already know, Shenzhen's taxi fleet run by BYD here is 99% electric today. And this is how they do their charging. One giant centralized hub full of chargers that the vehicles return to overnight to charge. This is a massive operation. To put this in perspective, just one of these chargers in a single day can pull as much power as the average American home pulls in 6 months. This simply won't scale for the commercial fleets that we work with here in the United States. And in fact, the infrastructure providers need some intelligence as to where these chargers should go, what quantities, what power they need to be able to make this happen. So at Stable, we help deploy EV chargers to maximize both fleet and charger utilization. If you think about those two things, they actually counter one another. If you're charging a lot, you're probably not driving very much. So how do you figure out the needs of both? What I want to show you here is a simulation of what it would look like to charge all the rideshare fleet in San Francisco, 6,500 vehicles at peak, in a giant centralized hub, as we saw in that picture with BYD. What you'll see is a ton of these vehicles flooding out overnight. Blue dots are good. These are revenue generating, highly utilized miles for those taxi vehicles. But as the day goes on, more and more red dots start to appear. These are inefficient miles. These are wasted miles traveling to that charging station. And you end up having this double inefficiency. You have an underutilized fleet of vehicles, and you have an underutilized charging hub. Less than half the chargers are actually being used at any given time, which isn't great from an infrastructure provider perspective. If you actually use some of the data science and intelligence that we provide at Stable, you in fact only need 315 chargers to serve 6,500 vehicles versus a more centralized approach, which requires over 1,250 DC fast chargers to serve 6,500 vehicles. That's a massive difference. Each one of those chargers costs anywhere around $30,000. We're able to do that by combining metrics such as traffic, energy capacity in those regions, permitting, understanding the price of real estate, and the fleet's own activity data to figure out where charging infrastructure should most efficiently be placed. And in doing so, we can have a much more efficient and highly utilized fleet and have that infrastructure be better utilized as well. An example of what we do, working with a confidential energy company to looking to forecast EV charging demand for given fleets. They're looking to serve the EV fleet market, predominantly these large urban fleets, and they're asking for Stable's help to figure out where those chargers should go, matching it to the fleet's actual data. So we analyze that data, and that energy company owns and operates those chargers. We don't own and operate the assets ourselves. So how do you work with us? If you're a fleet looking to electrify, Stable can help calculate the lowest cost infrastructure configuration, how many fast versus slow chargers, where should you put them and in what quantities? And if you're an infrastructure provider looking to serve this market or finance infrastructure here, Stable knows where the infrastructure is needed. Come talk to us. We have the data and the algorithms to make this happen. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate the time.
And now Paul Mitchison from Bumblebee Power.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be able to talk to you today about Bumblebee. We're a wireless power company and a spin out from Imperial College London. So I'm a professor at Imperial and a co-founder of Bumblebee. Our tagline, as you can see, is unleashing the power of mobility. By this, really, what we're referring to is the whole plethora of mobile devices. Of course, everybody these days has a cell phone. You're all familiar with the unfortunate image in the center of this slide when your phone runs out of power at always a very inconvenient time. But recharging portable devices is not just restricted to mobile phones and laptops. There are lots of other devices that are battery powered that need recharging. And in the case in the top left-hand corner of this slide with autonomous drones, well, they are autonomous. They can perform completely autonomous missions, except when they need to be recharged. They have to land, they have to have a person change the battery or plug them in. COVID is actually also causing us to be able to rethink urban transportation. And along with the issues related to pollution and climate change, there's a push towards e-mobility, and with COVID particularly, personal micro e-mobility. So this gives us another set of devices that need charging in the way of kick scooters, e-bikes, larger ride-on scooters, etc. And we are creating a wireless power technology that can help solve a lot of these issues. If you look at the way, taking the example at the moment of the micro e-mobility solutions, this gentleman on the right of this slide here is collecting kick scooters in a city. He's taking them home to recharge them, and he'll deploy them back on the street the next morning. And at the moment, that is generally how these sorts of schemes operate. Not particularly scalable, a big cost center, of course, associated with that for these scheme operators. And really the options that they have are plugging the devices in. So this guy is going to plug them in when he takes them home, perhaps to drive around with a van and swap batteries, or perhaps to consider a wireless charging solution. The problem is, and those of you that have got something like the Qi standard, wireless charging standard on your existing mobile phone, will know that the range over which that wireless charging system will operate is very, very limited. And it may be okay for a mobile phone, but it makes it very difficult if you're parking a scooter over a charging pad to maintain that level of accuracy. So essentially at Bumblebee, what we're doing is we're creating what we might think of as a wireless power technology 2.0. And that gives us much greater distance between the transmit and receive parts of the system, and a much greater tolerance to misalignment between the transmitter and the receiver. It's fundamentally possible because we're operating at much higher frequencies than the existing technologies are operating at. And there's a whole bunch of additional complexity that arises when you operate at high frequency. A decade or so of research here at Imperial has solved those problems, and we've got 4 patents that cover all sorts of different aspects of the technology to protect those unique things as we go forward. What does that actually enable us to do? Well, you can see here a comparison on the left of the energized zone that you have above a charging pad for 2 competing standards, and then what you can achieve with Bumblebee. And on the right here, you see a video of a little drone flying. There's a wireless power receiver, a Bumblebee wireless power receiver on that drone, and you can see it bobbing around above a charging pad with a very good distance between the transmitter and the receiver, and an extremely good tolerance to misalignment. So this is just a sort of, executive desk toy, if you like, but it's a great capability demonstrator for what we have. We're interested very much in the micro e-mobility space. We think that by installing wireless charging systems and having to not have the logistics of people going around and picking up scooters and taking them home and recharging them is a significant cost reduction for operators of these schemes. We think that they should be able to increase their profitability by an absolute minimum of around 25%. There are lots of operators now moving into cities all over the world. There are, in fact, these hire schemes available in around 200 cities already, with fleets of over 200,000 vehicles. This is a large market already and a growing market. What are we looking for? Well, we would be very interested in any partnerships with such e-mobility types of schemes. Anybody in particular at this stage that would be interested in helping us deploy a field trial of our technology into those schemes. What you can see here in the video is actually a prototype that we built for a large scooter, a ride-on scooter in this case, 700 watt system. And that's actually charging there at around about 80 to 85% end-to-end efficiency. Again, you know, we're interested in the kick scooters, e-bikes, and also these ride-on scooters as well. So my contact details are at the bottom there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much to all of our startups for being with us today. It's great to bring you all together for this roundtable now so we can delve a bit further into the technological developments. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions coming in from the audience too. Eli, I'd like to start with you. There's a big trend towards long duration storage, as Professor Chang talked about as well. Where do you see the industry heading?
You know, I think it's an interesting question, especially in the transition to sort of zero carbon emissions, first in industry and then in the entire energy sector. We look at it sort of like global supply chain. So when you ship stuff overseas or intercontinental, you've got large boats, you've got planes, you've got trains, you've got last mile delivery. And so I think the future is going to show a collection of long duration, short duration, and middle duration. Where those ratios will end up is to be determined, but we're going to need a little bit of everything in order to make sort of a stable grid that hits all the right boxes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Rohan, if you can tell us a bit more about Stable. Is Stable solution there just for the broader consumer market as well, or more for commercial fleets? Where do you see the future?
Yeah, Harveen, that's a fantastic question. We actually get this question quite a bit. So we are focused on the fleet segment. However, especially in recent months, as you can imagine, we've been getting a lot of inbound requests about, hey, can you also help me place chargers for the consumer market? And what's fascinating is that as long as the data is there, that is absolutely doable. The infrastructure providers just need some assurance that the infrastructure investment they're going to make, if you think about 10 of these, higher powered DC fast chargers, it's going to cost them about $1 million in capital, right? So if they're going to put $1 million investment into 10 DC fast chargers at a facility, they want to make sure it's actually going to be used. The investment's going to turn back an ROI. And so the data science that we do is fundamentally important to doing so as well. And some of the infrastructure providers we've talked to, want to offer a combination. In certain hours, they want to have commercial fleets charge there, and in certain hours, they want to open it up to the public. So the short answer to your question is absolutely, we can do that. And we're seeing more and more of that as the months go on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Paul Mitchison, Bumblebee, can you tell us a bit more about what other areas the Bumblebee power technology can be applied to outside of e-mobility?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we're focused on e-mobility at the moment. We think it's a very on-trend thing, and as I mentioned, it has significant scale associated with it. But I think the autonomous systems is another key element. I mentioned drones as well. I think you really enable something there that without the wireless charging you just can't do. You can have, imagine something like perimeter security. You can have drones landing and taking off all the time, being completely autonomous. But also things like medical technology, powering medical implants, recharging a pacemaker through the skin, all these sorts of things. And I think they're sort of also maybe what you might think of as a more mundane application, lots of things like, factory of the future. I think there's a lot to play for there as well. We've sort of steered a little bit away from consumer electronics at the moment as a small company because it's a pretty difficult area to operate in against some of the giants in those areas.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'll ask, what I'll do is I'll ask you a question, Paul Monroe, and then I'll come back to each of the startups. We'll talk a little bit about future opportunities, if you'd like to start giving that some thought. Paul Monroe, SMAP Energy. Tell us a little bit more about the applications and the broader markets as well, where it could apply.
Sure. So almost, well, there's definitely a mandate in the EU for smart meter installation to be happening. It's happening, of course, very broadly in the US, across China, across Japan, across Australia, and almost every region we're looking at will have smart meters being deployed. Just the data that's being generated from the meters is going to be fundamental to making the energy sector digital. And the applications that can ultimately happen from this, they will depend on a market-to-market basis. So you can have some very, very niche, very specific things that cater to a specific country situation. In fact, I would say we probably look at it on a country-by-country basis to determine where the need is. But there's value in both addressing the operational elements of being an energy utility and using the smart meter data to enhance those. And there's also the customer-facing elements that can come into play, such as the applications I was describing related to consumer behavioral driven applications for demand response. So they can be very very, very niche in this space, but there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of potential to enhance all the different areas of operations for utility.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So what I'll do is I'll go around to each of the startups again. So thinking about some of the businesses that might be listening in and looking for opportunities in these spaces, you each know the sectors really well. You've got to understand the competition. Could you perhaps each suggest, areas that you feel are currently being overlooked and where there's opportunity you can see for other businesses to enter? Eli, if I can start with you.
I think the large industrial sector, especially in the food and agriculture and chemical processing industry, when they look at their bottom line and the costs that they're spending on energy, there's a lot of savings to be had if they start to adopt, one, smart energy policies, but two, behind the meter storage. And that's really, one of the best things about working with a large industrial consumer is they get to help shape the product of a small startup coming out of stealth.
Brilliant. Thank you, Eli. Same question for you, Rohan.
Yeah, Harveen, is another great question. I think the one way to think about this is one stat I cited in my presentation earlier. Less than 0.5% of California's EVs are pulling almost a quarter of the power on public infrastructure today. What's fascinating, that stat is from the end of 2019. That is before both Uber and Lyft made commitments to go fully electric by 2030. Okay, that was before any of that was happening. This tiny fraction was pulling a quarter of the power. So in talking about missed opportunities, let's think about how rideshare and last mile delivery are picking up like crazy again post-COVID. And we're starting to see so much more activity in this space. If you are deploying infrastructure, charging infrastructure into major cities and countries around the world, you have to be taking into account how these kinds of fleets are going to be operating. These fleets don't want to deploy their infrastructure. In doing so, they're already using the public infrastructure and they're already dominating the energy use. If you're not considering that data, you're missing a massive opportunity there. And that's where we really want to provide that help and value.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rohan. Same question for you, Paul Mitchison.
Yeah, so actually, I think in general that wireless power as a technology is something that, it's going through the sort of, general technology hype cycle. And a few years ago, there was a huge amount of excitement about it. But I think fundamentally, a lot of the deployments that we've seen of it so far, and the one that people are most familiar with is the mobile phone charging. It just hasn't really lived up to expectations. If you think about the way that wireless communications completely revolutionized the way that we communicate and unfreed your laptop from the Ethernet cable, wireless power has still not done that. We're a decade or so, generally speaking, into the commercialization phase of this technology, and it's really not delivered that so far. So I'm hoping that what we're doing is providing a step change in capability that will let it live up to the hype. And I think once you do that, you open up a huge number of markets. So we've been focusing, as I mentioned, on personal micro e-mobility, but I think once you get that capability of lightweight systems, great tolerance to misalignment and great distance, there are just so many applications that you can roll out to. And it's important that we don't miss that opportunity, and people shouldn't get bogged down with existing wireless power technology. Let's look at the future technology and what it can do.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. So I'm going to ask you the same question, Paul Monroe, and then I've got a couple of questions from the audience come in that I'll be asking as well.
Sure. So while the smart meters effectively are going to be providing, of course, more granular energy consumption data, and when we were looking probably about half a decade or so now for the justification for why to install smart meters, a big component of that was how this data could be used to enable more dynamic pricing models. And this is something we've really only started scratching the surface on. I think many people will conceive their energy spend as something that they're strictly either paying a single rate or maybe a day or night rate for. But there's a lot of flexibility that we have, I think, to reward customers who can have more flexibility in their lifestyle, or who have increasing amounts of smarter connected devices, whether that's EV chargers, whether that's home batteries. As we start to incorporate these things, the real savings will come into play once we integrate the smart pricing models on top of the data. But that doesn't, of course, happen until we get the meters out and get the data in a way that's workable.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. We've got a question from the audience now. Are there any specific government policies that would help nudge businesses and consumers into taking up these technologies and solutions? Maybe we'll do one from the US and one from the UK. So Eli or Rohan, perhaps one of you can jump in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for us, it's obvious. There were a lot of clean energy and solar panel incentives in the United States, and I think that transferred globally as well. We don't yet see those incentives coming for storage at the macro or federal level in the United States, although it is trending towards that path. Once those types of vehicles, and usually their tax credits or other types of incentives, take place, you can see the broader public do widespread adaptation, and that really helps grow the technology, because like any technological life cycle, government's got to play a role in bringing down the price until the manufacturing price comes down.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Eli. And Paul Mitchison or Paul Monroe, perhaps one of you can jump in to speak about government policy in the UK.
I can just say something very quickly about, rather than sort of a policy which is sort of improving things, I think the important thing for us at the moment in the micro-mobility space is regulation that was previously in place, which was preventing things and has recently been removed. So these sort of free-form scooter hire schemes and kick scooters, whilst you've seen a lot of them about on the streets, certainly in London, for a number of years now, they've only just become legal for hire scheme operators to put kick scooters out. So it's come at a perfect time for us, at least, in terms of allowing us to approach these companies to deploy this technology.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. And we've got a question specifically for you, Paul Mitchison, for Bumblebee. And that is, what is unique about Bumblebee as compared to existing EV chargers? And where does the innovation at Bumblebee go next? How would you differentiate from competitors?
So if you look at the existing standards, they tend to have come from a kind of low frequency domain, we might think of. They operate typically at tens of kilohertz. And there are lots of reasons for that. Power electronics in general tends to operate in the tens to hundreds of kilohertz. We approached it from a very different angle. We operate at much higher frequency. That intrinsically means that the magnetic link is much more capable, and that allows you to get a much bigger distance and a much bigger tolerance to misalignment. It also presents a number of difficulties because the types of circuit that you use at megahertz are very different from the types of circuits you use at kilohertz. So we've had to do a lot of work on the circuit architectures to keep them efficient, keep them operating properly, controlling them at those high frequencies. So I hope that we've got a very good package of IP protecting all of the different aspects of the system, and the breakthrough is being able to make it work efficiently at high frequency, which then gives you a step change in capability of a wireless power system. Where does it go next? We're looking at things like, in particular at the moment, bidirectional capability. So rather than having a dedicated transmitter and a dedicated receiver, both ends of the link would become transceivers, and you could put power in both directions over the link. Very important for things like vehicle to grid applications.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So thank you to all of our startups that brings us to the end of the round table. I'd like to thank PolyJoule, Stable, Bumblebee Power and SMAP Energy, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to hear from anybody who'd like to get in touch.